I think that gospel passage that we just heard, it kind of sounds like it's one big typo, right? Somebody wrote it backwards. Jesus says, "Blessed are you who are poor," right? How lucky you are to have nothing. "And woe to those who are rich," right? Be careful about that money stuff. You want to keep away from it as much as possible. And he says things like, "Blessed are you who are hungry, and woe to you who are filled. Blessed are you when people hate you and when they insult you. But be careful, woe to you if everybody speaks well of you." You know, isn't that kind of a universal desire? We all want to be spoken well of. We all want to have that feeling that other people approve of us. And yet Jesus is saying the exact opposite on all of these things. He's saying, don't do that, right? Do it the other way. It's so counterintuitive and it sounds wrong, but what he's getting at is really the form of the whole Christian life. Because in our Christian faith, those things that cause us suffering itself, suffering is not something to be rejected. It's not something to be stamped out, to be avoided at all costs. Rather, for us, we see suffering as something that can sanctify us, that can save our souls, something that can contribute to the redemption of the world. And so it makes sense why Jesus is saying these things, because he's unfolding the mystery of the cross, that since Jesus accepted suffering because he accepted death, he brought new life into the world, and it's the same for us as well. When I learned that in my own life, it was kind of a turning point in my spiritual life. It just changed the way I thought about everything, and not that I practice it very well, but I learned that idea, and it really transformed the way I thought about things. And I learned it through St. Louis de Montfort. He was my confirmation saint, and the sufferings that he experienced and the way he was able to accept them as blessings from God. But I think you can probably see it in the life of just about any of the saints, right? The saints always had some kind of a cross that they were bearing, some kind of a suffering, and they turned it to the glory of God. In the 16th century, there was a Spanish mystic named St. John of the Cross. St. John of the Cross was a Carmelite, and he was appointed as the head of this monastery. But the monks at the monastery, they really did not care for John, because John came in and he wanted to restore the traditional practice of the Carmelite order, which would not have played very well with the kind of worldly things that this monastery had gotten into, right? They were very comfortable, and they didn't like John coming in and messing all of that up, right? They wanted to keep their comforts. And so they hatched a plot. They actually kidnapped John. They threw him in a cell. They locked him in there for a very extended period of time. He was forced to live on very little food and water. He was treated very badly, and he was very regularly ridiculed. They would bring him into the cafeteria, and as everybody else was sitting around him taking their meal, they would make him sit on the floor, and people were encouraged to whip him as they went by. So he was treated very, very badly. When he was finally released or escaped, he was given to a group of nuns, and these nuns were in charge of nursing him back to health because he was in pretty bad shape at that point. And when the nuns conversed with him, they asked him, what was that monastery that you came from, right? Who were these monks? What was happening? And John of the Cross, his response was, those monks, they were my greatest benefactors. He said, they were my greatest benefactors. And he didn't mean that sarcastically. He really meant it from the heart, because for St. John of the Cross, the suffering that he experienced at their hands, that was a moment of transformation for him, right? That was where he found the cross of Jesus. That was how he was united with Jesus. And union with Jesus was more important to him than anything that this world had to offer. And so he said, yes, those were my greatest benefactors. Those were my greatest benefactors. You see, St. John had in his soul these words of the gospel when Jesus says, blessed are you who are poor, for the kingdom of God is yours. Blessed are you who are now hungry, for you will be satisfied. Blessed are you who are now weeping, for you will laugh. And blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you and insult you, and denounce your name as evil on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice and leap for joy on that day. You know, I wonder what would happen if we took those words of Jesus to heart, if we actually took them literally, right? If we just accepted them as children and said, okay, Jesus is telling me I'm blessed if I'm poor. Jesus is telling me to be careful about riches. Jesus is telling me to rejoice when people hate me for what is good. If I really took that into my soul and I allowed myself to live that way, I think that we would become saints. I think that Jesus would burn through our soul like a fire, and he would transform us into something new. I think it would be incredible. I think we would love our neighbor more. I think we would love God more if we accepted those words as children. So where does that leave us? Well, obviously that example of St. John of the Cross is pretty high, right? That's a pretty high bar to get over. He was a saint. He was a doctor of the church. You know, we're not. So what does that leave us with? Well, certainly that's always possible because sanctity is always possible. But isn't it true that each one of us in our own life, we've got these little crosses, these little sufferings that we have to experience every day. We've got these little moments of poverty that we experience, right? Maybe it's the poverty of, you know, I have some kind of an obstacle and I'm trying to overcome it, and I find out that I don't have what it takes. I can't overcome it. You know, maybe I've got some kind of physical limitation and I can't do what I want to do or whatever it is. And all of those moments of poverty, they're moments when Jesus says to us, "Blessed are you who are poor, for the kingdom of heaven is yours," right? Maybe it's the poverty of just seeing my own weakness or, you know, getting embarrassed about something, whatever it is. But all of those moments are moments when we can experience communion with Christ and when we can offer ourselves to him. So I think, you know, all of those times, Jesus is saying, blessed are you, believe it, accept it. Because when we accept our sufferings, when we accept our difficulties, God brings new life into the world. God unites us to himself, and we are truly blessed in God's eyes.